Kevin, when I think about this, Bitcoin seems a bit like a bad boyfriend. He just gives me anxiety all day long. But here's the question as well. When we look at what happens over the next few hours, we're going to hear more from Jay Powell at the Fed. Where are we with Bitcoin at this point, do you think?
I actually think that digital currencies are here to stay. Most people that are willing to hold them, including institutions over the last 90 days, are willing to deal with the volatility. I'm fascinated, I'm investing, I'm holding a 3% weighting in it. The volatility sickens me, but I'm getting used to it. And finally, I'm starting to think about how do I invest in the infrastructure of mining Bitcoin.
Thanks. Investor Dan Loeb making some news this morning. This comes from his Twitter account, which is not verified, but Leslie Picker confirms that it is his account, and he calls this a deep dive. I'm going to read it to you, but this is a deep dive into someone who's really been, I guess, conflicted about Bitcoin. And listen to this. He says that I've been doing a deep dive into crypto lately. It's a real test of being intellectually open to new and controversial ideas. Culturally, I compared bridging the crypto world with the old as akin to finding a portal between two distinct worlds in the multiverse. Okay. Then also maintaining healthy skepticism while also deepening one's understanding requires one to engage in what Steve Jobs and, of course, Fitzgerald before him described as requisite for superior intellect to maintain two opposed ideas in one's mind and retain the ability to function. He goes on to say, then another conflict to overcome is the idea that being late to the crypto party will inevitably lead to the one taking the sucker seat at a high-stakes poker table versus this still being early days and what is now being adopted in the mainstream. So it just sounds like, I feel kind of bad because it just sounds like maybe better late than never. But, you know, after you watch it go from $8 to $48,000 and maybe resist the entire way to finally at $48,000 say, I need to look closer at this, better late than never. But he seems very conflicted, and that got very, I don't know. Keep it simple. And that got, I don't know whether it really is like a portal between the multiverses or not, Andrew, but, you know, he's thinking a lot about it. He's a little conflicted. I'm
with Dan, because you do have to hold two ideas in your head, or maybe not. I mean, the true bulls don't hold two things in their head, and true bears don't hold two ideas in their head either. So we will.
I want to start and get this out of the way with the elephant in the Richmond Fed computer room. Last week, the Fed payment system went down for about 4 hours. And traders want to know what happened and how vulnerable are we to this happening again?
It was an internal issue. I think we've described that. And it was an operator issue. It got fixed and it's back up and running.
And is this something that's likely to happen again? There have been calls to let the private sector have an even bigger role in the payment system. Does this undermine the Fed's argument that it should be the main payments master?
Oh, no, I don't think this one's going to happen again. That we've figured out. And, you know, these things do happen. Systems do click up and click down. I think we've addressed this one.
Bitcoin, you've generated a lot of headlines because you've suggested, paying municipal workers in Bitcoin, putting some of the city's reserves in Bitcoin, letting people pay taxes in Bitcoin. Isn't that risky? And tell me, how would that work?
Obviously, anytime you invest in anything, of course it's risky. Absolutely no obligation whatsoever for any of our employees to do that. In terms of the investment part, we invest in a variety of different commodities, whether they be, sugar, pork bellies, whatever the commodity may be.
Well, sure, but none of those other commodities fluctuate 10, 20% in a day the way Bitcoin does.
That's why it's something that we're studying, not necessarily something we're jumping right into.
I want to read you something that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said. Bitcoin is an extremely inefficient way of conducting transactions and is a highly speculative asset. I mean, so when you hear that from the Treasury Secretary, doesn't that make you think twice?
It doesn't surprise me at all that a Treasury Secretary would find a decentralized potential currency to be hostile to a currency that they control. For people who invest in Bitcoin, the allure is precisely that it's not backed by a central government, so it's not manipulatable by a central government.
You're talking about investing government resources in this completely decentralized resource, which scares people a bit.
Does it scare you? I guess it scares you.
I don't live here.
Okay, well, I guess it scares you.
It doesn't scare you.
I think it's something worth studying. I think it's something worth studying and worth looking at.
We've been mentioning the day that Bitcoin is having on the heels of this very large Citi report and Dan Loeb's tweet. For more on that, Kate Rooney's with us. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Carl, Bitcoin is back up about 10% after a volatile weekend. It had dropped to a 3-week low yesterday, falling below 43,000. Analysts pointed to a few different factors causing that dip over the weekend, including some jitters around what we heard from Coinbase last week. As part of its direct listing, the U.S. crypto exchange put out some new documents, and in the risks to its business section, Coinbase outlines events that could destabilize the price of Bitcoin. That includes regulation, hacks, and splits on the underlying network, which are called forks. It also cites the identification of Satoshi Nakamoto. That is the pseudonym for the person, or potentially multiple people, who developed Bitcoin. And Coinbase highlights any transfer of Nakamoto's Bitcoins, thought to be worth around $30 billion, as a potential risk factor. One fear is if Nakamoto is identified, that could damage Bitcoin's reputation as decentralized, or essentially not controlled by one central authority. And similar to what we saw with tech stocks last week, interest rates may be weighing on crypto sentiment. As rates on the 10-year rose, analysts say that some investors likely backed off of Bitcoin. And finally, Carl, you mentioned Citi out with that research note this morning saying Bitcoin is at the tipping point of mainstream acceptance or speculative implosion. On one hand, they say it could become the currency of choice for international trade, but they say there are still a host of risks and obstacles that stand in the way of Bitcoin's progress.